I want you to think about a company, okay? What
Yeah,
does a
I'm doing it.
company actually need to exist? At its very base, at its most basic core level, a company needs, it operates under governments. They largely need investors, whether or not like it's your money, you're investing in your own company, or they need, external investors. They
Hmm.
need customers, someone who pays them to do something or buy a widget. You need employees, whether that's just one employee who's you or a million. And you
Right.
need a system of resources in which to exist, right? Like, because it doesn't matter if you build a widget if you can't then drive the widget to someone
Yeah.
else's house, right?
Right.
And the widget could be made out of metal. You need to get that metal. That's all part of like this broader resource system. That's five stakeholders, okay?
Okay, I'm with you so far.
They provide the assets that a company uses to do whatever it does.
Okay.
Without them, the company doesn't exist. Now, this is not far from the academic and policy part. The company has largely, and this is what the Business Roundtable has sort of challenged, largely just paid all the money it gets. It just sort of thinks mostly about the investor. It pays the investor a dividend. It pays down its debt investors. It kind of like it buys back its stock. It pays its executives, and it does pay other people, obviously. But its purpose is very Milton Friedman, the economist from the 60s, who said companies' whole purpose is to create shareholder value. Now,
Okay.
if you add these stakeholders, you start to actually realize stakeholders require value too. And there's some easy ones, right? So, investors, you want a dividend. Governments get taxes, right? Like that's the value a government derives. That's a measurable value a government derives out of a company.
Sure.
And when the company sort of tries to find ways to not pay those taxes, then it's not actually returning anything to that stakeholder.
Yeah.
Not directly, indirectly,
Right.
sure, but not directly. A customer gets a product. If that product basically breaks the day you get it, or if it sucks, you got no value. You got no return on your
Yeah.
money. You think of that as like recalls for a car or something like that. But you're a stakeholder in this transaction. You have given the company money, you have provided it an asset, and in return, it's supposed to give you value. It's
Right.
just that idea, right? And then
Yep.
you have employees. Now, employees are giving you their time, which is
Hmm.
a super valuable asset. You might get 80 years on this world. And if you believe in another world, that's great. But if you don't, you get just the 80 years. And you working years are effectively from age like 18-ish to 66-ish, right? So really you're talking about
Okay.
50 odd years of time. And that's it. So when you give your time, you get paid for it. That's the whole
Sure.
idea, right? That's why you see strikes when you're not getting enough benefits, when income inequality is a problem, because you've effectively given a company your asset, which is your time, and you are not getting commensurate value for your time
Right.
necessarily. That's the
Yep.
argument. The last bucket, which is the system bucket, is the most difficult. It's something actually my buddy Mark Brammer. Shout out to Mark Brammer. He's in the middle of writing a book. He calls it the ecological bank. He basically says you're taking something out of the system, like you go dig up something out of the ground, and then you can't put it back, right? Like you're only withdrawing from the ecological bank. There's no return. So there's a whole bunch of ideas, and I have one. I'm not going to go into it here, but there's a whole bunch of ideas of how you measure the return. This is effectively what impact investing sort of is. How do you measure the return to the broader system in some way? Some populations, renewable energy, whatever. You're basically returning something to the system where you're using less from the system. So you either take less of the asset or you give more of the return. This, in a nutshell, is effectively the idea of sort of stakeholder. There are measurables for stakeholders in economics that I think can work to revalue a company. Because I
Okay.
want the last thing I want to put in your mind because, I mean, this is a little bit, philosophical and rambly. But the last thing I want to put in your mind as we sort of outro here is the idea of how would you measure the returns to stakeholders? Because the Business Roundtable, stakeholder return, because the Business Roundtable has put out the concept of they're answerable to stakeholders, not just shareholders. And the only way they can be answerable is if you can measure what the companies are actually giving to the stakeholders and say, shit, man, I got no return for your bullshit statement, or I'm getting something. So where I'm going to go over the course of the next month or two, and this is going to be a data intensive, I'm writing a paper on this, where I'm going to go,
I like it.
I'm going to dissect the companies on the Business Roundtable from a stakeholder viewpoint, because there are some measurables. There's like dividends and taxes and adjusted income and total compensation. There are measurables.
All right.
How much gets paid to stakeholders.